The Forgotten Realm Beneath Sleep, Cayce's reading on the second dream world. There's a morning you remember, not the details, not the sequence of events, but the feeling. You opened your eyes, and for just a moment, maybe 3 seconds, maybe 10, you weren't sure which world was real. The one you'd just left felt more solid than the mattress beneath you, more true than the sunlight coming through the window. You lay there, trying to hold on to it, the faces you'd seen, the place you'd been. It wasn't like your normal dreams, those jumbled montages of yesterday's worries dressed up in strange costumes. This was different. This felt like memory, and then it started to slip. Not fade exactly, slip. Like water through your fingers. The harder you grasped, the faster it disappeared. Within minutes, you were left with only the outline, the shape of something profound, the echo of a conversation that mattered more than anything you'd discussed that day, and a feeling you couldn't shake. You'd been somewhere. Edgar Cayce, the man known as America's most documented psychic, spent 43 years in self-induced trance, delivering over 14,000 readings on subjects ranging from past lives to prophecy to the nature of consciousness itself. But among all his teachings, there's one that remains largely unknown, whispered about in the archives of the Association for Research and Enlightenment, but rarely brought into full light. Across hundreds of readings, Cayce described something he called the second dream world, not a symbolic realm, not a metaphor for the subconscious mind. An actual dimension, as real as the physical world, perhaps more so, where souls travel during deep sleep. A place with geography and inhabitants, a school with curriculum, a hospital with healing chambers, a library containing every story your soul has ever lived. What if the dreams you can't shake aren't fragments of imagination? What if they're memories of a life you're living right now, in a dimension your waking mind has been trained to forget? This isn't speculation. This is doctrine hidden in plain sight, waiting in reading after reading for those willing to consider that sleep is not unconsciousness, but a different kind of consciousness entirely. Tonight, when you close your eyes, you will go there again. You always do. The question is, are you ready to understand where you've been going all along? Edgar Cayce did not speak about dreams the way psychologists do. He didn't see them as the mind's nightly housekeeping or symbolic communications from the subconscious, though he acknowledged both of those functions exist. Instead, Cayce described 3 distinct levels of dreaming, each occurring at different depths of sleep, each serving different purposes. The first level he called surface dreams, the mental processing we're all familiar with. Your brain sorting the day's information, playing with anxieties, rehearsing conversations you wish you'd had. These dreams are fragmented, illogical, easily forgotten. They're the mind talking to itself. The second level he identified as symbolic dreams. These come from deeper in the sleep cycle, and they carry messages from what Cayce called the subconscious self, that part of you that knows more than your waking consciousness admits. These dreams speak in the language of metaphor and archetype. They're the ones you remember vividly, the ones that feel heavy with meaning even if you can't quite decode them. But then there's the third level, the one Cayce returned to again and again in his readings, often with a tone of gentle urgency, as if he knew how important this teaching was and how easily it would be dismissed. He called it the second dream world, and he described it not as a state of mind, but as an actual place, a dimension that exists parallel to physical reality, accessible only when consciousness fully releases its grip on the body. This isn't astral projection, which Cayce discussed separately. This is something that happens naturally, every night, in the deepest phases of sleep. In reading after reading, Cayce's clients reported something extraordinary. They would describe a location they'd visited in a dream, a specific building, a garden with unusual geometry, a hall with crystalline walls. And then months later, another client would describe the same place in identical detail. People who had never met each other, living in different cities, were visiting the same locations in their sleep. One documented case preserved in the ARE archives describes two women, strangers to each other, who both reported dreams of a circular temple with 7 pillars and a fountain in the center. They each drew sketches upon waking. When the drawings were compared, they matched, down to the pattern of light refracting through the water. This wasn't coincidence, this was cartography of another world. Cayce explained that the second dream world is where consciousness goes when the physical body enters deep, restorative sleep. It's a realm maintained by what he called the creative forces, divine intelligence organizing experience, and it serves multiple purposes: education, healing, soul group communion, karmic adjustment, and preparation for future events. But this raises the central mystery. If we go there every night, if we spend hours in this realm engaging in profound work, learning from guides, meeting with other souls, why don't we remember? Why does the most important dimension of our existence remain almost entirely forgotten? Cayce was asked this question hundreds of times. People would come to him frustrated, sensing they were having experiences in sleep that mattered, but waking with nothing but fragments and feelings. Why the amnesia? Why the veil? His answer was both simple and profound. We forget by design, divine design. According to Cayce, human consciousness in its current state cannot fully hold the experience of both dimensions simultaneously without destabilization. The waking mind operates within the constraints of time, physical laws, and linear causality. The second dream world operates outside those constraints. Time moves differently there. Cause and effect are fluid. You can be in multiple locations simultaneously, or encounter people who haven't yet been born into physical form. Bringing that level of experience directly into waking consciousness would create what Cayce called psychic overwhelm. The mind would struggle to distinguish between what's happening now and what might happen, between physical reality and soul reality. For most people, that much awareness all at once would fracture focus rather than enhance it. So there's a protective mechanism built into the transition. Cayce described it as a veil that descends as the soul returns to the body, a gentle amnesia that allows you to function in the physical world without being constantly pulled back toward the dimension you just left. He spoke often of the silver cord, that energetic tether that connects consciousness to the physical body during sleep. As long as that cord remains intact, you can travel vast distances in the second dream world and return safely. But the cord also acts as a kind of filter as consciousness travels back along it, re-entering the density of physical form. Most of the soul-level experience is absorbed into the subconscious rather than brought into waking memory. You don't forget because the experience wasn't real. You forget because it was too real and your waking mind isn't yet equipped to hold it without losing its grounding in physical existence. But here's what Cayce emphasized repeatedly. The forgetting doesn't mean the experience is lost. Everything you learn in the second dream world is integrated into your being at the soul level. It changes you, even if you can't articulate how. That inexplicable knowing you woke up with, that sudden shift in perspective on a problem you've been wrestling with for months, that deep peace about a person or situation that makes no logical sense. These are not random. These are downloads from your nocturnal education. You are being taught every night, healed every night, prepared for challenges you'll face and opportunities you'll encounter. Your soul is doing profound work while your body rests. The fact that you don't consciously remember doesn't diminish the reality of what's happening. It protects you until you're ready to remember more. And some people do begin to remember, not through force, but through gradual spiritual development. As consciousness matures, as the soul stabilizes in its understanding of itself as more than physical, the veil thins, not all at once, but in moments, in flashes, in dreams that linger longer than they should. Cayce taught that this is part of the evolutionary journey. Humanity is slowly learning to be conscious citizens of both worlds, physical and soul dimension. But it's a delicate process. Rushing it can cause harm. Respecting it allows natural unfoldment. So if you wake frustrated that you can't remember where you've been, take comfort. You've been exactly where you needed to be. You've learned exactly what you needed to learn. And when the time is right, when your waking consciousness can hold more without destabilizing, you will remember. Until then, trust the process, trust the veil, and trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind can't track it. But what exactly is happening behind that veil? What does the second dream world actually look like? This is where Cayce's teachings move from abstract philosophy into something closer to travel documentation, because he didn't describe the second dream world as formless void or symbolic space. He described it with specificity, structures, locations, architectural details that clients would later confirm in their own experiences. The realm, according to Cayce, has what can only be called infrastructure, not physical matter as we know it. Everything there is made of light and conscious energy, but form nonetheless. Stable form that persists across time, maintained by collective intention and divine ordering. One of the most frequently mentioned structures in the readings is what Cayce called the healing temples, plural. Multiple temples, each specializing in different forms of restoration. Some focus on physical healing, where souls whose bodies are ill or injured in waking life are brought during deep sleep to receive energetic treatment that will later manifest as recovery. Others focus on emotional healing, chambers where trauma is gently released from the soul's memory. Still others work with karmic healing, helping souls resolve patterns that have persisted across lifetimes. Clients described these temples with remarkable consistency. Many spoke of circular or domed structures filled with colored light, blues and violets for spiritual healing, greens for physical restoration, golds for mental clarity. Some reported the presence of sound, tones, and harmonic frequencies that seemed to penetrate to the cellular level, rewriting pain into wholeness. In one documented case, a woman suffering from chronic illness reported a recurring dream of being led into a temple with rose-colored walls. She would lie on a table of light while robed figures moved their hands above her body. She felt warmth, then tingling, then an almost unbearable sense of release. Each time she had the dream, her symptoms improved. Her doctors couldn't explain it. Cayce could. She was receiving treatment in the healing temples during deep sleep, and her physical body was responding to the work being done in the soul dimension. Beyond the healing temples, Cayce described vast libraries. The most significant of these he called the Hall of Records, a repository where every soul's complete history is stored as living memory, not as books you read, but as records you experience. Step into your own record and you relive past lives. Understand karmic connections. See the contracts you made before incarnating. This isn't entertainment. This is education. Souls visit the Hall of Records when they need to understand why certain patterns keep repeating, or to access skills they carried in previous lifetimes. Then there are the teaching amphitheaters, outdoor or semi-open structures where souls gather to receive instruction from advanced beings. Cayce described one as having tiers of seats arranged in a spiral, all facing a central platform where beings of light share wisdom on spiritual law, the nature of consciousness, and the evolution of souls. People who visited these spaces in dreams often wake with sudden understanding of complex spiritual concepts they'd struggled with for years, and perhaps most moving are what Cayce called the meeting halls, spaces specifically designed for soul groups to reunite, family members separated by death, friends scattered across physical distance, twin flames incarnated in different time periods. These halls exist so that no soul is ever truly alone, so that the relationships that matter most continue uninterrupted by the illusion of separation. One man whose wife had died wrote to Cayce in desperation, asking if he would ever see her again. Cayce's reading gently informed him that he was already seeing her, nearly every night in a meeting hall in the second dream world. She was waiting for him there, and they spent hours together in that space. His grief, Cayce suggested, came not from separation, but from forgetting their nightly reunions. When the man began setting the intention before sleep to remember, he started waking with her presence still palpable, and his mourning transformed into something closer to peaceful waiting. The geography of the second dream world is consistent not because it's imagined uniformly, but because it's actually there, a dimension as organized and purposeful as physical reality, shaped by consciousness and divine order, maintained across time for the benefit of every traveling soul. You've been to these places, the healing temple when you've been sick, the library when you've needed answers, the amphitheater when you've been ready for deeper teaching, the meeting hall when you've ached for connection. You just didn't bring the memory back with you, but your soul was there, learning the architecture of a home you've always had but rarely remember. And that geography is populated, which raises the next essential question: who else is there? The second dream world, Cayce taught, is not an empty space you wander through alone. It's inhabited by multiple classes of beings, each with their own purpose and level of consciousness. Understanding who you might encounter there is essential. Not all interactions are benevolent, and not all beings have your highest good in mind. The first and most common inhabitants are other human souls, people currently incarnated in physical form whose consciousness has split during sleep. Cayce explained that while your body rests, your awareness divides. A portion stays tethered to the physical for maintenance and protection. The rest travels to the second dream world for learning and communion. This isn't astral projection where you consciously will yourself out of body. This is natural, automatic, and happens to everyone every night. This explains one of the most common yet dismissed experiences: meeting someone in a dream and then discovering they had the same dream. Two friends wake up and text each other. "You were in my dream last night." "You were in mine too." We've been taught to call this coincidence or telepathic bleed-through. Cayce called it what it is. Both souls were actually together in the second dream world, and both managed to bring back fragments of the meeting. These encounters aren't random. Cayce emphasized that souls are drawn together in that realm by magnetic resonance, shared karma, soul contracts, similar vibrational frequencies. You meet the people you need to meet. Sometimes it's for joyful reunion. Sometimes it's for necessary confrontation. Sometimes it's simply to maintain a bond that physical distance would otherwise fray. One case in the ARE archives describes two business partners who kept having the same dream, sitting together in a garden, having a conversation they couldn't remember upon waking, but always feeling afterward that something important had been resolved. Their waking relationship, which had been tense for months, began to soften. Problems that had seemed intractable suddenly found solutions. Cayce's reading confirmed. They were working through their conflicts in the second dream world first, preparing the ground for reconciliation in physical reality. But living humans aren't the only souls you'll encounter. Cayce spoke frequently of the deceased, those who have transitioned out of physical form but haven't yet reincarnated. Many remain in the second dream world, sometimes for years, continuing their learning and occasionally serving as guides for souls still incarnated. When someone you love dies and you dream of them looking healthy and at peace, Cayce would say, that's not wish fulfillment, that's actual visitation. They're meeting you in the dimension where such meetings are possible, assuring you they're well, continuing the relationship beyond the boundary of death. Then there are what Cayce called advanced souls, beings who have completed their cycle of earthly incarnations and now serve as teachers in the second dream world. These are the robed figures people describe in the healing temples and teaching amphitheaters. They're not angels or external deities. They're graduates of the human experience who've chosen to remain available as guides for those still learning. Cayce also spoke of guardian entities, what some traditions call angels, but he described them more as specialized consciousnesses assigned to help souls navigate both physical and soul dimensions. These beings don't incarnate. They exist specifically to protect, guide, and assist. Many of the feelings of being watched over, of narrowly avoiding danger due to inexplicable intuition, originate from the work of these guardians, work that often begins with interventions in the second dream world. But not all inhabitants are benevolent. Cayce was clear about this. He described lower vibrational zones within the realm, areas where confused, angry, or malevolent souls congregate. Some of these are deceased humans who died in states of rage or addiction and haven't yet moved toward healing. Others are entities he simply called negative forces, beings that feed on fear and seek to attach themselves to vulnerable consciousness. These encounters are real. When you wake from a nightmare that felt different from normal bad dreams, a nightmare where you felt violated, where something was actively trying to harm you, where the fear lingered long after waking, Cayce would say, you likely drifted into a lower zone of the second dream world. Not because you did anything wrong, but because consciousness doesn't always navigate perfectly, especially if you're carrying fear or trauma as you fall asleep. This is why Cayce insisted on protection practices before sleep. Prayer, intention setting, visualization of light. These aren't superstition. They're practical navigation tools. They set the vibrational frequency of your travel, determining which zones of the realm you'll access and which beings you'll attract. The second dream. World is not a fairy tale dimension where everything is love and light. It's a complex, multi-level reality that mirrors the spectrum of consciousness itself, from the highest to the lowest. You will meet beauty there. You will meet wisdom there. But you can also encounter danger there if you're not careful, if you're not intentional, if you don't protect your consciousness before letting it journey. This isn't meant to frighten you. It's meant to prepare you, because the realm is real and the inhabitants are real, and you're navigating it every single night, whether you remember or not. And what you do there, who you meet there, is shaping your waking life in ways you've never imagined. So what exactly are you doing during these nocturnal journeys? What's the curriculum of this forgotten school? If the second dream world is a school, and Cayce insisted it is, then what's being taught? What are you learning in those hours you can't remember? The curriculum, according to hundreds of Cayce's readings, is vast and personalized. No two souls follow exactly the same path, but there are common subjects every consciousness must eventually master. And much of that mastering happens not in waking study, but in the deep work of nocturnal learning. The first and perhaps most fundamental subject is karmic review and planning. Each night, portions of your consciousness meet with what Cayce called your higher self, the part of you that exists outside time, that remembers every lifetime, that chose the circumstances of this incarnation for specific growth. Together you review the day, not with judgment, but with compassion and strategic clarity. What patterns played out today? What opportunities for growth did you take or miss? What karmic debts are you balancing? What contracts with other souls are you fulfilling? This review happens quickly in dream time, and the insights gained inform your intuition when you wake. That sudden knowing that you need to call someone, that you need to change course on a decision, that you need to finally let something go. These often originate in the karmic review sessions of deep sleep. But the curriculum goes beyond review. There's active rehearsal. Cayce described this with remarkable specificity. Before you face a difficult situation in waking life, your consciousness rehearses it in the second dream world. You practice the conversation you'll need to have. You walk through the challenge you'll encounter. You strengthen the parts of yourself that will be tested. This is why sometimes when something hard finally happens, there's a strange sense of familiarity. You've been here before, not as déjà vu from a past life, but as rehearsal from a recent dream you didn't consciously remember. Your soul prepared you, and when the moment comes, you're stronger than you expected to be, calmer than you should be, because you already practiced this in a dimension where the stakes were different, but the learning was real. The curriculum also includes direct instruction on spiritual law. Cayce spoke of souls gathering in amphitheaters to receive teaching on subjects like the nature of free will, the mechanics of karma, the relationship between thought and manifestation, the purpose of suffering. These aren't lectures you sit through passively. In the second dream world, teaching is experiential. You don't just hear about how thought creates reality. You experience thought creating reality in that realm, where consciousness is less dense and cause-effect happens almost instantly. People who wake with sudden understanding of complex spiritual concepts often describe it as if they've always known it, but they're just remembering now. Cayce would say, that's accurate. They didn't learn it today. They learned it last night in a teaching session they attended, but didn't bring back to conscious memory. The information sank into the soul and is now rising into awareness. Then there's trauma healing, perhaps some of the deepest work done in the second dream world. Cayce explained that certain wounds are too profound to heal fully in waking consciousness. The defenses of the egoic mind, the stories we've built around our pain, the identities we've constructed from our suffering, these can actually block healing even when we desperately want it. But in deep sleep, those defenses soften. The conscious mind isn't there to protest or protect. And in that vulnerability, real healing can happen. Souls are brought to healing temples where guides work directly with the energetic imprint of trauma, removing it from the cellular memory, rewriting the soul's narrative, restoring wholeness that seemed impossible in waking life. This is why people sometimes wake from a night of deep sleep and find that pain they've carried for decades has inexplicably lightened. Therapists call it breakthrough. Cayce would call it night school graduation. You finally completed the healing module in the dimension where such healing is possible. And then there's preparation for death and transition. This is perhaps the most profound and least discussed part of the curriculum. Cayce taught that as souls approach the end of their current incarnation, whether that's months away or decades away, they begin attending what he called transition preparation sessions. In the second dream world, you're shown what death will be like. You meet the guides who will help you cross. You visit the places you'll go after leaving physical form. You even meet loved ones who will be waiting. This explains why so many people near the end of their lives report dreams of deceased family members who appear healthy and joyful, beckoning them toward beautiful landscapes. These aren't hallucinations. These are memories of actual meetings in the second dream world, where the dying soul is being gently prepared for the journey ahead, where fear is being systematically dissolved through direct experience. The curriculum is infinite because consciousness is infinite. You're being educated in dimensions you can't consciously track, on subjects your waking mind can barely conceive. And every lesson learned there ripples into your physical life as deeper wisdom, greater compassion, unexpected strength, and sudden knowing that has no logical source but feels absolutely true. You are a student in a school you've forgotten you attend, but your soul never forgets. Every morning when you wake, you carry forward the learning of the night, and some of that learning happens in very specific locations, spaces designed exclusively for healing. Among all of Cayce's teachings about the second dream world, none were as consistent or as extensively documented as his descriptions of the healing temples. He returned to them again and again, across hundreds of readings for clients struggling with chronic illness, emotional trauma, and spiritual exhaustion that conventional treatment couldn't touch. The temples exist in what Cayce called the higher vibrational zones of the second dream world, regions where the density of consciousness is lighter, where love and order are the organizing principles. They're not metaphorical. They're as architecturally real as any hospital in physical space, and they serve the same function: restoration of what's been damaged, realignment of what's been disrupted, healing of what's been broken, but they operate on a different principle than physical medicine. In waking reality, we treat symptoms, the body's malfunctions, the mind's imbalances, the emotions' distortions. In the healing temples, treatment goes to the source, to the energetic blueprint that shapes physical form, to the soul-level wounds that manifest as chronic conditions, to the karmic patterns that keep recreating the same illnesses across lifetimes. Cayce described multiple temples, each specializing in different forms of healing. There are temples of physical restoration, where souls whose bodies are failing in waking life are brought during deep sleep. Guides, advanced souls who specialize in healing work, use color, sound, and direct energetic manipulation to rewrite the patterns causing disease. One woman with degenerative spine condition wrote to Cayce in desperation after years of progressive decline. His reading told her she was already receiving treatment every night in a temple he described as having amethyst walls and a central pool of luminous water. She was being immersed in that water during deep sleep, and the treatment was slowly reversing the degeneration at the energetic level. Her job was simply to continue sleeping deeply, to trust the process, and to support the work through prayer and meditation before bed. She followed his guidance, and over the next year, against all medical expectation, her condition stabilized and began to improve. Her doctors called it spontaneous remission. Cayce called it what it was: healing that began in another dimension and slowly manifested into physical reality. Then there are temples of emotional and psychological healing, spaces where souls carrying trauma too heavy for waking consciousness to process are brought for gentle repair. Cayce explained that certain experiences, childhood abuse, violent death in a past life, betrayal that shattered trust, create wounds in the soul itself, not just in the personality. These wounds don't heal through talking or analyzing. They heal through direct intervention at the soul level. In these temples, souls are held in what Cayce described as chambers of light, not light you see, but light you become. The memory of the trauma is accessed, but without the pain. The imprint is located in the soul's energetic structure, and then it's carefully, lovingly dissolved. Not erased, the lesson remains, but the charge is removed. The wound is closed. People who undergo this healing often describe a peculiar experience. They wake one morning and realize that a pain they've carried for years is simply gone. Not forgotten, but neutralized. The story is still there, but it no longer hurts. Therapists might call it integration. Cayce would call it temple work, healing that happened while you slept in dimensions Your waking mind didn't track. There are also temples of karmic repair, perhaps the most complex and least understood of the healing spaces. Cayce taught that souls accumulate karmic damage across lifetimes. Choices made in anger or ignorance in one life create patterns that persist into the next. Old vows that should have dissolved continue to bind. Past life connections meant to be released still exert influence. The karmic temples are where these entanglements are addressed. Souls meet there, both the one carrying the wound and the one who caused it, often both incarnated in current physical form but unconscious of each other in waking life. Agreements are renegotiated. Forgiveness is extended. Contracts are released. One man suffering from inexplicable anxiety around authority figures received a reading from Cayce, suggesting that in a past life he'd been executed by an unjust ruler. The trauma of that death had carried forward, creating the present fear. But Cayce's reading revealed something else. He was meeting that ruler in the karmic temple during his sleep. The two souls were working through the past life dynamic, extending and receiving forgiveness, releasing the bond. The man was told to set the intention before sleep to complete this healing. He did. And over the following months, the anxiety gradually dissolved. He encountered authority figures with new ease. The pattern was broken, not through effort, but through soul-level repair that happened in a dimension beyond his waking awareness. The healing temples are not places you go to consciously, at least not at first. Your soul is brought there by guides when the need is great and the timing is right. You don't have to believe in them for them to work. You don't have to remember being there for the healing to be real. You only have to sleep deeply enough to make the journey. But Cayce did offer ways to support the process. Prayer before sleep, asking for healing help, visualization of light surrounding your body as you drift off. The simple intention, may I be taken where I need to go for my highest healing. These practices don't force the journey, they remove resistance to it. If you've ever woken from a full night's sleep, feeling inexplicably renewed, as if something heavy was lifted while you slept, you may have been to the temples. If you've experienced sudden improvement in a condition that had been stubbornly resistant to treatment, you may have been to the temples. If you felt an old emotional wound simply vanish overnight, leaving you confused but grateful, you were probably to the temples. The healing you've been praying for in your waking hours may already be underway in dimensions you visit every night. The temples are always open. The guides are always working. The only question is, are you sleeping deeply enough to make the journey? And beyond the healing temples lies another structure, one that holds not just your pain, but your entire story. If the second dream world has a center, a heart, a place of ultimate significance, Cayce suggested it might be what he called the Hall of Records, not to be confused with the physical hall he believed existed in Egypt near the Sphinx. This is the soul dimension version, the original, the archive that exists beyond matter, holding every story every soul has ever lived. Cayce described it with a sense of reverence that colored even his trance voice. A vast structure, he said, that appears different to different souls based on their consciousness and need. Some see it as a library with infinite shelves. Some experience it as a cathedral of light. Others encounter it as a living garden where memories bloom like flowers you can step into and become. But regardless of how it appears, its function is consistent. It holds your complete history, every lifetime you've lived, every choice you've made, every relationship you've had, every lesson you've learned or failed to learn, every talent you've developed, every karma you've accrued, all of it, stored not as abstract information but as living record, experienceable memory. This is what mystics and seers across cultures have called the Akashic Records. Cayce simply gave it location and made it accessible. He taught that souls visit the Hall of Records during deep sleep for very specific reasons. You don't go there for entertainment or idle curiosity. You're brought there by guides when you need to understand something essential about your current life that can only be explained by your past. Why are you terrified of water despite never having drowned in this life? The Hall of Records might show you a past life death by drowning, explaining the phobia not as psychological malfunction but as soul-level memory. Why do you have an inexplicable skill you never formally learned? Speaking a language you've never studied, understanding music theory you've never been taught, knowing how to navigate complex social dynamics without training. The Hall of Records reveals past lifetimes where you mastered these abilities, and they've bled through into your current incarnation. One of the most documented cases in Cayce's work involved a young boy with extraordinary musical ability despite no musical background in his family. Under hypnosis facilitated by Cayce, the boy accessed memories of being a composer in 18th century Germany, complete with specific compositions he could now partially reproduce. Cayce's reading confirmed the boy's soul had visited the Hall of Records during sleep, accessing his own past life expertise, and the skill was reactivating in his current body. But the hall doesn't just store talents and traumas. It holds karmic contracts, the agreements your soul made before this incarnation, who you agreed to meet, what lessons you agreed to learn, what debts you agreed to balance. These contracts aren't fate in the sense of predetermined outcomes. They're more like curriculum you designed for yourself, knowing what growth you needed. When you meet someone and feel instant recognition, not déjà vu, but deeper, like finding someone you've known forever, there's often a soul contract at play. Cayce taught that souls frequently visit the hall together during sleep, reviewing their shared history, understanding the purpose of their current life meeting. Sometimes this brings comfort, sometimes it brings completion, allowing both souls to release a bond that served its purpose. Then there are the future potentials. The Hall of Records, according to Cayce, doesn't just store the past. It holds what he called probable futures, pathways your life could take based on current choices and karmic momentum. Not fixed destiny, but likely trajectories. When you visit this section of the hall during sleep, you're given preview of where your current path is leading. This explains prophetic dreams, the ones where you see something that hasn't happened yet, and then weeks or months later, it unfolds exactly as you dreamed it. You're not seeing the future as fixed reality, you're seeing a probable future from the records, and if circumstances don't change, that probability manifests. But here's what makes the Hall of Records so profound in Cayce's teaching. Access doesn't require psychic ability or spiritual mastery. You're already going there. Every soul visits, though most don't consciously remember. The information you need is being given to you during sleep, and it rises into your waking life as intuition, sudden knowing, inexplicable attraction or aversion, dreams that feel more like memory than imagination. That skill you have that you can't explain. That fear you've carried for no logical reason. That person you met and instantly trusted, or instantly distrusted with no rational basis. That sense of purpose you've felt since childhood, even though you can't articulate what it is. These are all artifacts of visits to the Hall of Records. Information from your soul's complete story bleeding through into conscious awareness. Cayce offered a practice for those who wanted more conscious access. Before sleep, ask a specific question, not "show me my past lives" in general, that's too broad, but something focused. Why do I struggle with this relationship? Where does this creative impulse come from? What am I meant to do with this part of my life? Ask clearly, then release attachment to receiving an answer. Sleep deeply, and pay attention to what you know when you wake that you didn't know before. The Hall of Records is not closed to you. You're not barred from your own story. You visit more often than you realize, and everything you've ever been, Everything you've ever known, everything you came here to accomplish. It's all waiting there, archived in light, accessible the moment your soul is ready to remember. But you're not navigating the second dream world alone. You're part of a larger constellation,